That city street you walked down today was likely determined by an ancient river. Beneath the concrete and steel lies an invisible map of forgotten landscapes that silently guided where our ancestors built, traded, and thrived. This journey uncovers how prehistoric geography shaped every civilization in history, giving you the power to see the invisible forces that built our world. Why did Rome rise exactly where it did, and what hidden valley doomed a rival city to dust? How can a mountain pass from 2,000 years ago still influence modern politics today? By the end, you will never look at a map the same way again. What forgotten landscape do you think is hiding beneath your own hometown? Earth's surface is a restless, shifting stage. Over millions of years, continents have slid across the planet's face, colliding to thrust up mountain ranges and pulling apart to create vast ocean basins. This slow motion, driven by the immense heat deep within the planet, sculpted the world's fundamental architecture long before the first human ever walked upon it. Think of the Himalayas, the Andes, the Alps. These are not permanent fixtures. They are relatively recent wrinkles in the planet's skin, formed by the relentless pressure of tectonic plates. These geological events created the primary features that would dictate human fate. A mountain range could block rainfall, creating a desert on one side and a fertile plain on the other. A river valley carved by water following the path of least resistance down a slope created by an ancient fault line would become a highway for migration and trade. This primordial stage setting established the rules of the game. It determined where soil would be rich, where water would be plentiful, and where natural defenses could be found. The arrangement of these geological gifts and obstacles channeled the flow of human history, guiding our ancestors toward certain valleys and away from other, more forbidding lands. Why did civilization bloom so early in places like Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley? The answer is written not in history books, but in the very rocks and river systems beneath them. The geological canvas provided the palette. Human ingenuity would supply the painting. The Nile did not simply flow through Egypt. It was Egypt, every aspect of life, from the food grown in the fields to the very rhythm of the calendar, pulsed to the river's annual flood. This pattern repeats across the globe wherever civilization first took root. The great rivers were the planet's original life support systems. Their waters quenched thirst, their currents carried boats laden with goods and ideas, and most importantly, their floods performed a kind of annual magic. Each year, rivers like the Tigris and Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Indus in South Asia, and the Yellow River in China would overflow their banks. When the waters receded, they left behind a fresh layer of incredibly fertile silt, a gift of new soil that made intensive agriculture possible. This was the engine that powered the first cities. Without this predictable, life-giving cycle, sustaining large, permanent populations would have been nearly impossible. But these rivers did more than just feed people. They shaped the very map of human movement. Think of a river's course not as a single line, but as a branching network of opportunity. Where the river curved, creating a natural harbor, a trading post might appear. Where a smaller tributary joined the main channel, that junction became a natural meeting point, a place for different groups to exchange not only goods but also languages, technologies, and customs. The width and depth of the river determined the size of boats that could travel it, which in turn dictated the scale of trade. A narrow, shallow river valley acted as a funnel, channeling all movement and communication along a single, predictable corridor. This is why you find the ruins of ancient cities strung along old riverbanks like beads on a string. They were tethered to the lifeline, and this ancient dependency is not just a relic of the past. Look at a modern map of Cairo, Baghdad, or Lahore. You will find the sprawling metropolis still anchored to that very same riverbank, its highways and railways often tracing the same routes that donkey caravans and river barges used thousands of years ago. The waterway's original purpose for transport may have faded, but the settlement pattern it locked into place remains, a ghost of the landscape imprinted upon our modern world. But rivers were not the only architects of human connection. While river valleys guided movement from within a region, the world's great mountain ranges stood as colossal walls between them. These immense barriers of rock and ice forced human ambition into a narrow and difficult focus. The only way through was up. High mountain passes became the planet's most dramatic gateways. Think of the thin, cold air of a Himalayan pass, where for centuries Silk Road caravans of camels and merchants trudged slowly between China and the West. They were not just carrying silk and spices. In their saddlebags were revolutionary ideas, entire languages, mathematical concepts, and religious beliefs, all moving at the pace of a walking animal. A single, precarious path through an otherwise impassable wall could become the sole artery for cultural exchange between entire continents. The Alps channeled movement between northern and southern Europe through a handful of key passes, determining the flow of armies, pilgrims, and trade goods for millennia. In the Andes, mountain passes connected isolated highland communities, allowing the Inca Empire to knit together a vast and rugged territory with a network of roads that hinged on these critical points. The availability of a pass and the difficulty of crossing it decided everything. A relatively easy route meant frequent contact, shared technologies, and intertwined cultures. An impossible barrier meant isolation. Some societies developed in complete seclusion for centuries, their languages and traditions evolving independently, precisely because no navigable pass connected them to the outside world. Conversely, the cultures that controlled these vital choke points often grew immensely powerful, acting as gatekeepers who could tax the flow of wealth and knowledge. This ancient geography of access and isolation is not a closed chapter. Look at a modern map of global conflict, and you will often find disputed borders located at these very same mountain passes. The roads and tunnels we build today, our engineering marvels of concrete and steel, frequently follow the exact same routes that ancient traders and herders first scouted, proving that while our technology has changed, the fundamental logic of the landscape remains. While mountain passes channeled movement across the land, the world's coastlines offered an entirely different kind of invitation. For the ancient Phoenicians, the jagged Mediterranean shore was not a barrier but a sprawling map of opportunity. They looked at a protected bay and saw a perfect natural harbor, a place to build a city that could launch ships to the horizon. Coastal geography became a ruthless selector, determining which cultures would become masters of the sea. A deep, calm bay sheltered from the open ocean was worth more than a mountain of gold. It was a naval base, a trading hub, and a gateway to the unknown. In such a harbor, a civilization could build and maintain a fleet, safe from storms and enemies. The city of Carthage, for instance, was famed for its circular harbor, a man-made enhancement of a natural coastal formation that made it a naval superpower. Conversely, a coastline of straight, sandy beaches or treacherous cliffs offered few places for ships to shelter. Societies along such shores often remained landlocked in their outlook, their potential for sea power strangled by the very shape of their border. But the coastline did more than just provide parking for ships. Its specific contours, the way peninsulas reached out into the sea and islands dotted the horizon, taught sailors the secrets of the wind and waves. The Greeks, navigating their archipelago of countless islands, learned to read the seasonal winds like a familiar road. They used the islands as stepping stones, always keeping land in sight as they hopped from one cove to the next, their maritime confidence growing with each voyage. This mastery of the coastal environment allowed them to plant colonies all across the Mediterranean, spreading their culture and ideas. Far to the north, the Vikings faced a different coastal reality. Their fjords, deep glacial valleys flooded by the sea, provided perfect hidden harbors and direct access to the open ocean. These fierce seafarers used this geographical gift to launch their longships, not just across a sheltered sea, but into the vast, stormy Atlantic, reaching lands as far away as North America. The favorable coastline gave them the tools, but their bravery supplied the ambition. These ancient patterns of maritime trade, established by the Phoenicians, the Greeks, and later the Venetians and the Hanseatic League, were literally drawn by the coastline. A good harbor naturally became a node in a growing network. The routes between them were dictated by prevailing currents and winds, creating predictable sea lanes that carried spices, silks, amber, and knowledge. And if you look at a map of global shipping today, you will see a ghost of that ancient network. The world's busiest container ports are often located on the very same sites as those ancient harbors, and the major shipping lanes still follow the same basic paths that the first intrepid sailors discovered millennia ago. The ships are now metal giants and the cargo is digital, but the fundamental logic of the coastline remains, silently guiding the flow of global wealth. Yet the most forbidding landscapes often hide the most vital crossroads. In the heart of a vast desert, an oasis is more than a cluster of palm trees around a spring. It is an island in a sea of sand, a life raft for travelers and a pulsating heart for commerce. The location of these precious water sources was not random. They were dictated by deep, hidden aquifers and ancient geological faults that allowed water to seep toward the surface. Where the water broke through, life and civilization followed. These oases became the fixed points on a vast, invisible map, the only possible stops on a journey that could last for months. The entire Silk Road was not one single path, but a braided network of trails, and its course across the brutal Taklamakan Desert was entirely determined by the string of oases along its edges. A caravan's survival depended on reaching the next well or spring before its water supplies ran out. This simple, brutal fact of geography meant that a tiny, lush patch of land in the middle of nowhere could control the flow of silk, spices, and gems between mighty empires. Control the oasis, and you controlled the trade route. Cities like Palmyra in Syria grew fabulously wealthy not from producing goods, but from simply existing at the right point on the map, taxing the caravans that had no other choice but to pass through their gates. But these were not merely economic hubs, they were incredible melting pots. In the markets of a Saharan oasis, a trader from West Africa might barter with a merchant from the Mediterranean, while scholars exchanged astronomical charts and religious texts. Languages blended, and new artistic styles were born from this forced interaction at the world's most remote watering holes. The power dynamics were stark. An empire that secured a chain of oases could project its influence across a continent, lose control of them, and its trade would wither, and its cultural connections would be severed. This ancient dependency on desert geography is written into our modern world in surprising ways. Look at satellite images of the Sahara today, and you will see the ghost of those old caravan routes. The paved highways and pipelines that carry oil and natural gas often follow the exact same paths, connecting the same oases that supported camel caravans 2,000 years ago. We have swapped camels for trucks and water skins for diesel fuel, but the fundamental logic of the landscape, the unyielding need to connect these islands of life, remains utterly unchanged. A vast, open plain presents humanity with a fundamental choice. Will you stay and farm, or will you roam with your herds? The answer was never just about human will. It was written in the dirt, the rainfall, and the gentle slope of the land itself. The great plains of the world, from the Eurasian steppe to the American prairie, were not blank slates. They were complex geographical systems that dictated the very rhythm of life. In regions blessed with rich, wind-blown soil known as loess, the land itself was an invitation to settle down. The deep, fertile soils of China's Yellow River Basin and the sprawling breadbasket of Ukraine could support the back-breaking work of intensive farming. Here, the geography rewarded patience and permanence. A family could clear a plot, plant seeds, and trust that the earth would provide a surplus, a harvest large enough to feed not just themselves but others, allowing for specialization for potters, weavers, and soldiers to emerge. This was the agricultural revolution's engine room, but just over the horizon, on the very same plain, the conditions could shift. Where the soil was thinner, the rainfall less reliable, a different way of life flourished. Here, the openness of the landscape was not for planting but for passage. This was the domain of the pastoral nomad, whose wealth was measured in herds of sheep, goats, and horses. They lived in a constant, graceful migration, following the seasonal grasses that their animals needed to survive. The same flat topography that allowed a farmer to plow a straight furrow for miles also allowed a nomadic chieftain to move his entire people and their herds across staggering distances. This geographical reality created a dramatic and enduring tension. The farmer, rooted to his field, built walls and granaries. The herder, master of the open space, lived in portable tents and moved with the seasons. Their worlds were separate, yet they were forever linked by the geography that housed them both. The Silk Road itself relied on this symbiotic relationship, with nomadic tribes often providing the guides and protection for merchant caravans crossing their territories. This ancient division of labor, forced by the subtle variations of the plain, echoes into our modern world. Look at a map of agricultural production today. The most productive wheat fields and corn belts of the world sit squarely on those same fertile plains that first supported early farmers. National borders were often drawn to encompass these valuable breadbaskets, making control of fertile land a cornerstone of national power for centuries. The ghost of that ancient choice between the farmer's fence and the herder's trail is still visible from the air in the vast geometric patchwork of fields that now covers the world's most productive plains. A volcano's fury can erase a civilization from the map, yet its aftermath can lay the foundation for an empire. The cataclysmic eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE did not just shatter the sophisticated Minoan world. It scattered a deep, mineral-rich layer of ash across the eastern Mediterranean, a gift of fertility that would, centuries later, help fuel the rise of classical Greece. This is the fundamental paradox of volcanic lands. They are places of immense danger and even greater reward, where the very forces that threaten extinction also provide the tools for spectacular rebirth. The soil born from volcanic ash is unlike any other. It is packed with essential nutrients like potassium and phosphorus, creating farmlands of almost magical productivity. The plains around Mount Vesuvius, for instance, became the breadbasket of ancient Rome, their vineyards and wheat fields flourishing in earth that had once been fire and rock. But the gifts went far beyond simple fertility. The dramatic violence of volcanic activity often sculpts the land itself into strategic strongholds. an extinct volcanic plug could become a natural acropolis, easily defended and impossible to ignore. A collapsed caldera flooded by the sea could create a perfect circular harbor, offering shelter and naval dominance. Even the rocks themselves were a resource. Lightweight, easy-to-carve volcanic stone like tuff became the primary building block for entire cities. More importantly, civilizations learned to transform this volatile landscape into technological advantage. The Romans discovered that by mixing volcanic ash from the Pastoral region with lime and water, they created a revolutionary building material, pozzolana concrete. This was not just simple mortar, it could harden underwater, allowing them to build massive harbors and bridges, and it formed the backbone of their iconic structures from the Colosseum to the Pantheon. This concrete literally built their empire, giving them an infrastructural edge that their rivals could not match. Living on such unstable ground forced a kind of hyper-vigilance and innovation. Societies in volcanic regions often developed advanced systems for water management, storing precious rainwater in vast cisterns against the threat of disrupted springs. They learned to read the subtle tremors and gas releases, the earliest forms of disaster preparedness woven into their culture and mythology. The constant presence of threat fostered a unique resilience, a communal understanding that the ground beneath their feet was both a benefactor and a potential executioner. This volatile relationship between human civilization and the planet's fiery interior is not confined to the ancient world. Today, some of the most densely populated and agriculturally rich regions on Earth, from the islands of Indonesia to the foothills of the Andes, are built directly upon the Ring of Fire. We are still drawn to these fertile slopes, still building our cities in the shadow of sleeping giants, betting our future on the same paradoxical gifts that shaped our past. A dense, unbroken wall of ancient trees once marked the edge of the known world. For early farmers, the forest was a realm of profound contradiction. It offered everything needed for survival, yet its very depth threatened to swallow them whole. This was the frontier, the shifting line where cultivated fields gave way to the wild woods. The forest edge was not just a boundary on a map. It was a living, breathing limit to human ambition, a place where the orderly rhythm of the plow met the chaotic, untamed heartbeat of the wilderness. On one side lay the security of the village and its wheat fields. On the other, an immense storehouse of timber for building, firewood for warmth, and game for food. But this treasure came at a steep price. Clearing land for farming was a generations-long battle against roots and resilient undergrowth, a battle fought with stone axes and fire. The sheer density of the woods made them a formidable barrier to movement and communication, isolating communities and allowing unique cultures to develop in the clearings between the trees. The type of forest itself dictated the path of progress. In Europe, the immense, hard trunks of oak and beech forests demanded the strongest tools. This relentless need to cut and shape hardwoods became a powerful engine for innovation, pushing metalworking technology forward as blacksmiths forged ever sharper axes and stronger plowshares. Far away in the bamboo forests of East Asia, the challenge was different. Here, the fast-growing hollow stalks inspired an entirely different suite of technologies, leading to lightweight construction, intricate water systems, and writing materials that would preserve knowledge for centuries. A civilization's relationship with its forest frontier was a delicate balancing act. Those who managed it wisely, like the Romans who carefully regulated the cutting of timber for their navy, secured a steady flow of resources while maintaining a defensible natural border against invaders. Those who failed, who cleared too much too quickly, often found their fertile topsoil washing away, their prosperity literally vanishing downriver. That ancient line between field and forest is not gone. You can still see its ghost today. Look at the patchwork landscapes of rural Europe or the eastern United States. The winding country roads, the shapes of fields, and even the locations of our oldest towns often trace that original, hard-won boundary where the axe and the plow finally stopped and the deep woods began. Our modern conservation efforts to protect old-growth forests are, in a way, the latest chapter in this ancient story, a recognition that this primordial frontier still holds a power over us, defining not just our landscape, but our very relationship with the natural world. An island is a world in miniature, a stage where the forces of evolution and innovation play out with a unique intensity. Cut off from the vast continents by miles of open water, these landmasses became natural laboratories where human societies could experiment and develop in profound isolation. The results were some of the most distinctive cultures in human history. On Crete, the Minoans built labyrinthine palaces without the influence of their Egyptian or Mesopotamian contemporaries, their art swirling with images of bull leaping and marine life. Far to the east, the islands of Japan cultivated traditions of samurai and shoguns, their language and social structures diverging sharply from the mainland Asian models. And on the massive island of Madagascar, an entire ecosystem of unique plants and animals was matched by a human culture whose language and ancestry traced back not to nearby Africa, but to distant Southeast Asia. This isolation was the primary ingredient, allowing for the slow, undisturbed simmer of cultural identity. Yet not all isolation was created equal. The size of an island was its fundamental constraint, a hard limit on ambition. A tiny speck of land in the Pacific might only support a few hundred people living as hunter-gatherers or simple farmers, but a larger island like Crete or Cyprus possessed the sheer physical space and diverse environments to nurture a complex society with cities, specialized crafts, and centralized rule. Its carrying capacity could support a surplus population, the fuel for civilization. Distance from the mainland acted as a dial, controlling the flow of outside ideas. Islands sitting just offshore, like Britain, experienced a constant, if sometimes stormy, conversation with the continent. Those separated by vast oceanic distances, like Easter Island, experienced centuries of total solitude, their development following a trajectory so unique it became a mystery to the outside world. This geographic reality created two powerful island archetypes. Some, blessed with a strategic location along maritime trade routes, became bustling crossroads. Think of Sicily, a triangular stepping stone in the middle of the Mediterranean. Its history a layered cake of Greek, Carthaginian, Roman, and Norman conquest. Its harbors buzzed with the languages of three continents, and its culture absorbed influences from all of them. Other islands, due to treacherous surrounding seas or simply being off the main shipping lanes, remained in deep isolation. The societies on these islands often developed technologies and social systems found nowhere else, their very strangeness a testament to the power of separation. The specific resources an island offered then shaped its destiny in concrete ways. An island rich in dense forests like Crete once was could become a naval power, building the ships that would connect it to other worlds. An island with deposits of obsidian, a volcanic glass perfect for razor-sharp tools, could become a center of industry and trade, its valuable materials sought by distant mainlanders. An island with fertile volcanic soil could support a dense agricultural population, while one with poor, thin earth might see its society remain small and decentralized. The path of each island civilization was a direct response to the particular menu of opportunities and limitations presented by its shores. These ancient, isolated evolutionary pathways did not simply vanish with the age of exploration. They left a deep cultural imprint that continues to shape our world. The distinct national identities of Japan, Britain, and Sri Lanka are direct products of their island geographies, a legacy of that long, formative period when the sea was not a highway but a wall. The most fertile land on Earth is often born from chaos, where a great river shatters into 1,000 channels before meeting the sea. In these sprawling, waterlogged plains known as river deltas, the line between land and water blurs into a mosaic of mud, marsh, and incredible abundance. A delta is nature's ultimate paradox, a landscape of both immense promise and constant peril, forcing the humans who settled there to become masters of their environment or perish. The gift was the soil itself. Every flood season, the river would spread across the vast, flat plain, dropping a fresh layer of mineral-rich silt carried from distant mountains. This created some of the most productive farmland on the planet, soil so rich it could yield multiple harvests each year. But this gift was conditional. To farm here, you had to tame the very waters that gave you life. Uncontrolled flooding could wash away entire villages just as easily as it could fertilize a field. The solution was not simply to build a wall, but to orchestrate the water. Ancient farmers began digging canals to guide the floodwaters to their fields and drain them away when the danger passed. They built the first simple levees to protect their homes. This was not a task for a single family. Managing a delta required a community, then a network of villages, and eventually a centralized authority with the power to coordinate thousands of laborers. The branching waterways of a delta, like those of the Nile or the Tigris and Euphrates, became the world's first administrative grids. A scribe or a tax collector could travel by boat to every corner of the realm, following these natural liquid highways. This constant need to manage water, land, and people on a massive scale sparked an intellectual revolution. To redraw field boundaries after a flood, you needed advanced geometry. To store grain surpluses for a bad year, you needed systems of accounting. To mobilize a labor force to dig a new canal, you needed a bureaucracy capable of record-keeping and command. The very first forms of writing, mathematics, and centralized government emerged from this practical, life-or-death necessity to control the delta's chaotic fertility. The civilizations that mastered this environment, like ancient Egypt, did not just become wealthy. They became sophisticated, developing the foundational skills that would later build pyramids and chart the stars. That ancient legacy is written into our modern world in the most direct way possible. Look at the Nile Delta today, or the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta in Bangladesh. These are some of the most densely populated regions on Earth, with megacities and countless farms all sustained by the same agricultural miracle that fed the pharaohs. The original challenge of the delta, written in water and silt, set in motion a chain of innovation that would ultimately shape the modern world. A deep, echoing chamber offered our ancestors something no other landscape could: absolute shelter from a dangerous world. These natural cave systems were humanity's first true homes, providing a fixed address in a nomadic existence. The discovery of a good cave was a matter of survival, not just comfort. A south-facing entrance captured the low winter sun, warming the interior naturally while deflecting the cold northern winds. A location within sight of a freshwater spring or river meant safety and sustenance were guaranteed. And a high, defensible entrance, perhaps reachable only by a narrow ledge, offered protection from predators and rival groups. This specific combination of geological features created a real estate market dictated entirely by nature. The distribution of these ideal caves across continents acted like a hidden map, channeling the earliest human migrations. Families and clans would have passed down knowledge of these safe havens for generations, their movements across vast territories often linking one known cave system to the next. Some regions, blessed with soft limestone bedrock carved by ancient water, became population hubs simply because they offered more places to live. Others, with hard, impermeable rock, remained empty, unable to support permanent settlement. Inside these stone walls, something more profound than mere survival began to flourish. The psychological security of a solid roof and a defensible door allowed for a new kind of social life. There was time to talk, to teach, to create. The flickering firelight danced on walls that would become humanity's first canvases. In the deep silence of Lascaux in France or the echoing chambers of Sulawesi in Indonesia, our ancestors mixed pigments and told their stories, not with words, but with stunning images of the animals they revered and hunted. This was the birth of symbolic thought, of a shared culture that could be passed down. The cave was more than a house. It was a sanctuary, a classroom, and a gallery, all carved by geological chance. That fundamental human need for a safe place to gather and create, first answered by a random cave, would eventually inspire us to build our own versions, from the first mud brick huts to the great cathedrals and community centers of today. The very architecture of security and community began in those ancient, hallowed spaces. The slow, grinding retreat of the last great ice sheets did not simply reveal a landscape. It presented humanity with a brand new world, sculpted and furnished by forces almost beyond comprehension. As glaciers miles thick pulled back, they left behind a raw, fresh geography perfectly prepped for human arrival. Their incredible power had scraped away the old world, carving deep gashes into the bedrock that would later fill with water to become the Great Lakes, the Norwegian fjords, and countless other basins. But they were also builders, pushing immense piles of pulverized rock and soil ahead of them like colossal bulldozers. When the ice finally melted, it dropped this debris, creating rolling hills of fertile sediment known as moraines, and blanketing vast regions in a layer of rich, wind-blown silt called loess. This was not just dirt, it was the foundation for future breadbaskets, the fertile plains of Europe, North America, and Asia that would one day feed empires. The meltwater itself was the final gift. Torrents of water from the dying ice carved new river channels and filled gigantic depressions, creating the very lakes and river systems that the first farmers would rely on for irrigation. The timing of this glacial retreat was everything. It opened up new continents for settlement, not all at once, but in stages. As the ice receded from Europe, it uncovered a land bridge to the British Isles, allowing plants, animals, and eventually humans to walk across. In North America, an ice-free corridor opened between two massive sheets, creating a pathway for the first people to spread south into a continent teeming with game. These were not just empty spaces on a map, they were invitations, their fertility and accessibility dictated by the precise moment the ice decided to let go. The legacy of this icy landscaping is not buried in the past. You can see it in the sprawling farms of America's Midwest, growing corn on soil that was once glacial silt. You can trace it in the shipping lanes of the Great Lakes, following waterways carved by ice 20,000 years ago. Even the very location of major cities like Chicago or Toronto was determined by the shoreline of a much larger, ancient lake left by the glaciers. The ice is long gone, but the blueprint it left behind still dictates where we live, what we eat, and how we move across the land. The legend of Atlantis is not merely a story. It is a ghost, an echo of a time when the world's coastline stretched 100 miles farther out to sea. These lost continents of folklore, from Atlantis to Lemuria, often hold a sliver of geological truth, a memory of real landscapes that vanished beneath the waves. When the great ice sheets locked away vast quantities of water, global sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are today. This exposed sprawling coastal plains that are now the submerged continental shelves. These were not barren wastelands but fertile, habitable landscapes crisscrossed by rivers and teeming with game. They were the original bridges of humanity. One of the most significant was Doggerland, a vast territory that connected the British Isles to mainland Europe. For thousands of years, it was a heartland of human activity, a region of rolling hills, marshes, and dense forests where Mesolithic hunters tracked deer and gathered resources. Then, as the world warmed, the ice melted and the seas began their relentless rise. Doggerland did not vanish in a single cataclysm, but was slowly, inexorably drowned, its hills becoming islands, its valleys becoming bays, until the final remnants were swallowed by a tsunami around 8,000 years ago. The North Sea now covers what was once a central stage for human prehistory. Across the world, the same drama unfolded. The Sunda Shelf connected the islands of Indonesia into a single, massive peninsula, a tropical paradise known as Sunderland that was a cradle for early human migration and settlement. To the north, the Bering Land Bridge, or Beringia, formed a 1,000-mile-wide grassland corridor that allowed the first people to walk from Asia into the Americas. These were not just empty passageways, they were thriving ecosystems, home to animals and the humans who hunted them, the very settings where crucial chapters of the human story were written. And then they were erased from the map, their histories submerged along with the land. Is it any wonder that nearly every culture on Earth possesses a foundational myth of a great flood? From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah, these narratives of a world consumed by water may be the deepest, oldest memories of our species, a collective recollection of watching our ancestral homelands disappear forever. Today, the search for these lost worlds has moved offshore. Underwater archaeologists, using sonar and remotely operated vehicles, are mapping these drowned landscapes, discovering ancient river channels, stone tools, and the bones of mammoths on the seafloor. Each discovery is a piece of a forgotten puzzle, proving that some of the most important sites for understanding our past are not on any continent, but hidden beneath the waves, waiting to tell their story. The Sahara was not always a sea of sand. Just 5,000 years ago, this vast expanse was a mosaic of grasslands and shimmering lakes, a world where giraffes and hippos roamed riverbanks teeming with fish. This lush paradise, now buried beneath dunes, was the stage for early human societies who lived a life we can barely conceive of today. Then the climate shifted. The rains faltered, the lakes shrank, and the green slowly bled out of the land, replaced by the relentless advance of the desert. This was not a slow fade, but a dramatic collapse of an entire ecosystem, forcing a mass human exodus on a continental scale. Where could they go? The survivors were funneled by the changing landscape, their options narrowing to the few remaining pockets of life. One of the greatest rivers on Earth became the ultimate refuge. The Nile Valley, once just one of many habitable zones, suddenly became a life raft, receiving wave after wave of people displaced by the drying of their homelands. This sudden, massive influx of population into the Nile corridor was a crucible for civilization. More people in a confined space meant more competition for resources, more need for organization, and a rapid acceleration of social and political complexity. The need to manage water and farmland for this concentrated population likely helped catalyze the very institution of the pharaohs, transforming a collection of villages into the centralized state of ancient Egypt. The same process unfolded along the Mediterranean coast and south toward the Niger River, where other refugee populations gathered and pooled their knowledge, sparking new innovations under the pressure of survival. At the same time, the desert itself was hardening into the barrier we know today. The Sahara became an impassable wall, severing the once fluid connections between the cultures of the Mediterranean and those of sub-Saharan Africa. This geographical divorce meant that the societies on either side of the Sand Sea began to develop in profound isolation from one another, their technologies, languages, and political systems evolving down separate paths for millennia. The evidence of this lost world is not just buried in the sand. It is painted on the walls of caves in the middle of the modern desert. There, in stunning detail, you can find rock art depicting the savanna that once was, with images of elephants, cattle, and human figures swimming, scenes utterly alien to the surrounding emptiness. These artworks are haunting memorials, a testament to a world that vanished, left by people who watched their home turn to dust. This story is a powerful reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not permanent. A change in climate, a shift in the rains, can rewrite the entire map of human civilization in just a few generations, redirecting the flow of people and ideas and determining which cultures will flourish and which will be forgotten to the sand. The greatest exchange of ideas in human history was not a matter of choice, but a matter of geography. The Silk Road was never one road. It was a sprawling web of trails, a network born from a simple, brutal reality. The landscape of Asia itself permitted only a few possible paths. Try to draw a line from China to the Mediterranean on a map, and you will quickly see the constraints. To the north, the frozen steppes and trackless forests of Siberia presented a formidable barrier. To the south, the towering, ice-clad ramparts of the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau were utterly impassable for laden caravans. This left only a central corridor, a narrow geographical window where travel was even conceivable. And within that window, the terrain became an even stricter editor. The colossal wall of the Tian Shan and Pamir Mountains did not block the way completely. Instead, they presented a series of gates, high-altitude passes like the Toru Ghat or the Mintaka, where the mountains temporarily relented. These passes were not pleasant pathways. They were windswept, freezing, and treacherous, but they were the only option. Every camel, every merchant, every bolt of silk, and every Buddhist scripture had to funnel through these same few points of weakness in the rock. Once through the mountains, the next challenge was even more unforgiving. The Taklamakan Desert, a vast sea of shifting sand dunes known as the Desert of Death, lay directly in the path. A caravan could not simply cut straight across its heart. To do so was suicide. The only way around was to cling to its edges, to follow a northern or southern route that connected a string of life-saving oases. These watering holes were not placed there by human design. They were gifts of the underlying geology, places where underground aquifers bubbled to the surface. The location of these oases was fixed and non-negotiable. This geographical reality made the rise of certain cities completely inevitable. Look at a map of the Silk Road, and you will always find Samarkand, Kashgar, and Dunhuang. They were not the most powerful cities at the start, nor were they necessarily the most innovative. They were simply in the right place, positioned at the critical junctions where mountain routes descended into the desert, or where the two desert paths converged. A merchant arriving from the punishing Taklamakan had no choice but to stop at Dunhuang to rest and resupply before facing the next mountain range. A trader coming through the Pamir passes would inevitably meet others in the bustling markets of Samarkand. These cities grew fabulously wealthy and culturally brilliant not through their own inherent genius, but because the landscape forced all of Eurasia's traffic to pass through their gates. The flow of silk, spices, glass, and paper was merely following the paths of least resistance dictated by rock and sand. This ancient geographical imperative did not end with the last camel caravan. If you look at a modern map of Eurasian infrastructure, you will see its ghost perfectly preserved. The railways that now carry containers from China to Europe do not blaze a new trail. They snake through the exact same mountain passes, avoiding the same desert, and stopping in the very same cities that were hubs 2,000 years ago. Our high-speed trains, in a very real sense, are still following the invisible map drawn by ancient rivers, forgotten oases, and the relentless, unyielding logic of the land. A political border drawn today might be enforcing a division that the sea created 10,000 years ago. When ocean levels were over 100 meters lower, the map of the world was fundamentally different. Vast coastal plains stretched where there is now only open water, and land bridges connected continents, creating superhighways for the first human migrations. The English Channel was a river valley cutting through a sprawling plain known as Doggerland, which connected Britain to Europe. Early hunter-gatherers moved freely across this land, unaware they were walking on what would become the seabed. Then the ice melted and the waters rose. The slow flooding of Doggerland did more than just drown a landscape. It physically severed Britain from the continent, transforming it from a European peninsula into an island. This single geographical event, dictated by ancient climate change, set the stage for a distinct national identity and a political destiny of often deliberate separation from mainland affairs. The same process unfolded across the globe. To the east, the rising seas isolated the Japanese archipelago, allowing its unique culture to develop in profound solitude. To the south, the land bridge between New Guinea and Australia vanished beneath the waves, separating the peoples and ecosystems of those two landmasses and creating a political division that would later be formalized by colonial powers. These are not ancient footnotes, they are the very foundations of modern political geography. The continental shelves that were once exposed acted as natural settlement zones for our ancestors. When the water returned, it did not erase those human patterns. It simply locked them into a new configuration of islands and peninsulas, each with a cultural identity shaped by its period of isolation or connection. The modern map of Southeast Asia, with its thousands of islands, is a direct reflection of which hilltops remained above the rising waters. This deep history even explains modern conflicts. Look at the complex maritime disputes in the South China Sea. The competing territorial claims are not just about recent discoveries of oil and gas. They are often based on arguments over exclusive economic zones that extend from coastlines and tiny islands. Many of those islands are merely the highest points of a vast, submerged continental shelf that was once a continuous, habitable landmass. Nations are, in a very real sense, arguing over the political ownership of a drowned world, a landscape that vanished millennia ago, but whose ghost still dictates the lines we draw on maps today. The next time you see a news report about a diplomatic spat over a remote island, remember that the roots of that conflict may reach back to a time when that island was not an island at all, but a hill in the center of a thriving plain. The Mediterranean Sea functioned as the world's first superhighway, a liquid continent that bound disparate shores into a single, dynamic system. Its calm, predictable waters, sheltered by surrounding landmasses, offered an invitation rather than a threat. Early sailors did not need to brave the open ocean. They could navigate by keeping land in sight, hopping from one island to the next like stepping stones across a giant pond. This ease of movement meant that a new idea or invention discovered in one port could ripple across the entire sea within a single generation. The very shape of the coastline accelerated this exchange. Every deep bay offered a natural harbor, every peninsula a strategic lookout, and every narrow strait a chokepoint point to control the flow of ships. The island of Crete, positioned squarely between three continents, became a maritime crossroads, its Minoan palaces filling with goods and influences from Egypt, Anatolia, and mainland Greece. This was not a random outcome. It was geographical destiny written in the contours of the shore. This interconnected world thrived because no single region had everything it needed. The mountains of Anatolia were rich in silver and copper, while the forests of Lebanon grew the mighty cedars needed to build trading ships. Egypt's Nile Delta produced immense grain surpluses, and the volcanic soils of Italy yielded fine wines and olives. No civilization was an island, even if it was on an island. They were forced to specialize and to trade. A city like Tyre, with its access to timber but little farmland, became a shipbuilding powerhouse, its merchants venturing to the ends of the known world to secure other essentials. This network of necessity created a complex, interdependent economy spanning the entire basin. A farmer in Sicily might grow wheat that fed a miner in Spain, whose silver paid for a Greek mercenary who served a pharaoh in Egypt. The sea was the circuit board that connected all these specialized nodes, and the flow of goods along its routes carried something even more valuable than cargo: the flow of ideas. Perhaps the most subtle yet powerful geographical gift was the sea's east-west orientation. Unlike a north-south oriented body of water that crosses climate zones, the Mediterranean shores shared a similar latitude. This meant they enjoyed a nearly identical climate, with rainy winters and hot, dry summers. A crop domesticated in the Levant, like olives or grapes, could be transplanted to Greece, Italy, or Spain with a high chance of success. An agricultural technique perfected in one valley would work just as well in another 1,000 miles to the west. This climatic uniformity lowered the barrier to the spread of civilization itself. A farmer migrating from Phoenicia to the coast of North Africa did not need to reinvent how to grow food. He could bring his seeds, his tools, and his knowledge, and they would all work. This allowed for the rapid diffusion of the entire Mediterranean agricultural package, creating a shared economic foundation upon which diverse cultures could build. The final piece of the puzzle was the strategic landscape. The arrangement of land and sea did not create a level playing field. It created natural centers of power. A city built on a narrow strait like Corinth in Greece could control all sea traffic between two major bodies of water and grow wealthy from the tolls. A territory with a deep, sheltered harbor and a defensible acropolis like Athens was handed a natural advantage in security and naval prowess. The specific location of Sicily, a fertile triangle of land in the middle of the shipping lanes, made it a perpetual prize fought over by Carthaginians, Greeks, and Romans for centuries. The geography predetermined the flashpoints of conflict and the seats of empire. This is why the Mediterranean became such a fertile ground for civilization. It was not just a body of water, it was a perfectly designed arena that forced interaction, rewarded innovation, and channeled human ambition into a crucible of cultural fusion, whose legacy still shapes the Western world today. High in the thin air of the Mexican highlands, volcanic soil created farmlands of stunning fertility, but this gift came with a steep price. Every slope had to be carved into steps, into intricate terraces that captured precious rainwater and prevented the rich earth from washing away. In these mountains, civilizations like the Aztecs learned to read the landscape with precision, building their cities not just anywhere, but at the exact points where mountain passes met lake systems, controlling the flow of goods and information across the entire region. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was a marvel of geographical adaptation, an island city in the middle of a lake, connected to the mainland by causeways and fed by aqueducts carrying fresh water from the volcanic springs. They transformed a swamp into a metropolis by understanding the logic of their confined valley. Meanwhile, far to the south in the steamy Maya lowlands, an entirely different civilization faced a different set of geographical rules. Here in the dense rainforest, the challenge was not a lack of water, but its erratic distribution. The limestone bedrock swallowed rainwater into hidden underground rivers, leaving the surface dry for much of the year. The Maya response was not terracing, but water management on a colossal scale. They built vast, intricate reservoirs to capture rainfall during the wet season, creating artificial lakes that would sustain their sprawling cities through months of drought. Their grand cities were not placed randomly. They were positioned to control the few reliable water sources, the sacred cenotes, those natural wells that were the only portals to the life-giving water below. This fundamental difference in environment led to profoundly different societies. The Highlanders, with their concentrated resources and defensible valleys, built centralized militaristic empires. The Lowlanders, spread across a vast and difficult terrain, developed into a network of powerful, independent city-states, often at war with each other, yet bound by shared beliefs and a dazzlingly complex calendar system. Why did these two great civilizations never merge into a single empire? The answer lies in the land itself. The rugged mountains and dense, disease-ridden jungles that separated them acted as a far more effective barrier than any wall. In the Americas, without horses to ride or rivers deep enough for long-distance trade boats, a journey of a few hundred miles could represent a world of difference, isolating cultures and allowing them to evolve in spectacularly unique ways. The very geographical factors that enabled their rise, the isolated valleys and distinct ecological zones, also created a fatal fragility. When strangers arrived from across the ocean, bringing new animals, new technologies, and invisible diseases, these separate worlds, so perfectly adapted to their own landscapes, had no shared immunity, no unified defense. The intricate, localized balance they had achieved with their environment became a trap, leaving their brilliant, isolated civilizations profoundly vulnerable to a world they never knew was there. The Indian subcontinent is a colossal fortress of nature, walled in by the highest mountains on Earth and surrounded on three sides by the sea. This immense geographical prison also became an incredible cradle of civilization, a world unto itself where cultures could simmer and blend in profound isolation. Inside these natural walls, the land itself dictated a complex destiny. To the northwest, the Indus River carved a valley of stark order, its cities laid out with a geometric precision that suggests a society built on control and water management. To the east, the Ganges sprawled as a vast, life-giving plain, its humid, fertile expanse nurturing a very different spiritual and philosophical world, one of epic kingdoms and dense forests where ascetics sought enlightenment. Between these two great river basins lay a band of dry, difficult land, a natural buffer that kept their early cultures distinct for centuries. And running down the center of it all, the high, rugged tableland of the Deccan Plateau acted as a tilted stage, dividing the north from the south and forcing the development of separate languages, artistic traditions, and political histories that persist to this day. But the true master of this world was not a river or a mountain. It was the wind, the subcontinent's unique position, thrust like a triangular pier into the Indian Ocean, created the most powerful seasonal climate engine on the planet, the monsoon. Every aspect of life came to revolve around this cycle of hope and desperation. The entire agricultural year, and thus the survival of millions, hung on the timely arrival of the life-giving rains. This dependency on a force beyond human control seeped into the very soul of the culture, giving rise to gods of rain and rivers, and shaping religious rituals that were, at their heart, a plea to the sky. The social fabric was woven around the monsoon's rhythm, dictating when to plant, when to harvest, and when to stay indoors for study and prayer. The coastline, meanwhile, offered a different kind of opportunity. While the north was largely landlocked, focused on its great river plains, the long, indented coasts of the south became launch pads for maritime empires. The kingdoms of the Cholas and Cheras did not just look inward. They built great fleets using the predictable monsoon winds to sail across the bay, planting their culture, their temples, and their scripts across Southeast Asia and trading for gold and spices with the distant shores of East Africa. The South developed a cosmopolitan, outward-looking identity precisely because its geography pointed it toward the ocean, and the legacy of this ancient geographical script is not locked in history books. You can see it in the modern map of South Asia. The political borders, the distribution of languages, the location of its greatest cities, and even the tensions between its nations are all, in some way, a reflection of that original crucible, a world defined by its mountains, divided by its plateau, united by its rivers, and ruled by the rain. Two vast river systems carved the very soul of China. The Yellow River, known as China's sorrow for its devastating floods, churned with a heavy load of yellowish silt called loess, a soil so fertile it could feed millions but so volatile it demanded a master. This river did not just invite civilization, it commanded it. To harness its power and prevent catastrophic flooding, villages had to band together, forming ever larger alliances that required a single, powerful authority to coordinate the building of dikes and canals. This was the cradle of Chinese bureaucracy, born from the urgent, collective need to control the water. Further south, the Yangtze River offered a different promise. Its warmer, wetter climate and more predictable flow created a landscape of lush rice paddies, a second agricultural heartland that could support an even denser population. The genius of early Chinese statecraft lay in uniting these two distinct ecological zones. The east-west orientation of these river valleys was crucial. A crop or an idea could travel from the Yellow River basin to the upper Yangtze without crossing drastic climate barriers, allowing a shared set of agricultural practices and administrative techniques to spread across 1,000 miles. This geographical alignment made a unified empire not just a dream, but a logistical possibility. Yet within this vast, integrated world, the land itself carved out pockets of profound diversity. While the rivers flowed east-west, fostering connection, the mountain ranges often ran north-south, creating natural walls. The Kinling Mountains, for instance, form a stark biological and cultural divide, separating the wheat-eating north from the rice-eating south. To this day, the dialects, the cuisine, and even the temperament of people on either side of this range reflect a deep-seated geographical separation that persisted for millennia. The empire was a single body, but its regions were distinct organs, each shaped by its own valley, its own climate, and its own mountain-enclosed basin. This internal diversity was a source of both resilience and creative tension, fueling the incredible cultural richness that defined Chinese civilization. The empire's relationship with the outside world was dictated by a handful of mountain passes. China was not so much an open country as a fortified garden, surrounded by the formidable barriers of the Himalayas, the Tian Shan, and the Gobi Desert. There were only a few places where the walls were low enough to cross. Passes like the Jade Gate in the west became legendary funnels for trade and conflict. It was through these narrow geographical keyholes that the Silk Road entered China, bringing Buddhism from India and new artistic influences from Persia. But these same passes were also the avenues of invasion, the routes that Mongol horsemen would later use to sweep down into the heartland. The Great Wall itself is a man-made response to this natural geography, built to reinforce the mountain barriers and to control the points of access. Who controlled the pass controlled the dialogue between China and the world. deciding whether the exchange would be one of silk for glass or of diplomacy for war. This delicate balance between unity and diversity, between internal order and external threat, created the distinct rhythm of Chinese history, the Dynastic Cycle. The same Yellow River whose fertile silt fed the empire would eventually clog its own bed with sediment, raising the riverbed above the surrounding plains and making catastrophic floods inevitable. A strong, centralized dynasty could manage this challenge, maintaining the dikes and canals that held the water at bay. But when central authority weakened, when corruption set in, the river would inevitably break free, unleashing famine and social chaos that shattered the empire's unity. The dynasty would fall, and a period of internal division would follow, often aligning with those old north-south mountain barriers. Then, a new, vigorous power would emerge, often from the north, reunify the river valleys, and the cycle would begin again, a 5,000-year pulse driven by the unyielding logic of the land. A river that floods predictably demands a calendar to track its rhythm. The ancient Egyptians, living at the mercy of the Nile, became masters of time and measurement. Their survival depended on knowing exactly when the waters would rise and recede, so they mapped the stars with such precision that their calendar was only a few hours off from our modern calculations. This was not a quest for abstract knowledge. It was a direct, practical response to the landscape's most basic requirement. In the same way, the rugged Greek coastline, with its thin soil and scattered islands, offered little reward for large-scale farming. The real wealth lay across the water. This geographical reality forced the Greeks to look outward, to innovate in ship design and navigation, turning the sea from a barrier into their personal highway. Their trireme warships and merchant vessels were not just tools of trade, but the very engines of their culture, born from a land that pushed them toward the waves. Geography did not just suggest solutions, it dictated the raw materials for innovation. In the sprawling river valleys of Mesopotamia, where stone was scarce but mud was plentiful, people learned to press marks into wet clay tablets. This simple act, born from local necessity, gave rise to one of the world's first writing systems, cuneiform. Meanwhile, along the Nile, the papyrus reed flourished in the marshy delta. Egyptians discovered how to slice its pith into strips and press them into smooth, flexible sheets, creating a portable medium for record-keeping that was far lighter than clay. And in the bamboo forests of China, the fast-growing hollow stalks inspired not just construction and tools, but also became one of the earliest writing surfaces, their unique properties shaping the very style and tools of Chinese calligraphy. The landscape provided the toolkit, and human ingenuity did the rest, with each invention perfectly suited to its environment. These technological breakthroughs rarely stayed put. They traveled, but they did not wander randomly. An irrigation technique perfected in the arid fields of Mesopotamia could easily transfer to the similarly dry climates of Persia and the Indus Valley. The knowledge flowed along corridors of similar geography, carried by traders and migrants who found that a solution that worked in one river valley often worked perfectly in another. But a mountain range or a sea could act as a protective bubble, allowing a technology to develop in profound isolation. The complex metalworking of the Andes, for instance, evolved separately from the iron smelting of Africa, each a brilliant, localized answer to the specific ores and needs of its own high-altitude world. Then, when a mountain pass was opened or a new sea route was charted, these isolated technologies would suddenly burst forth, transforming entire regions. The compass, first developed in China for spiritual purposes, revolutionized European navigation once it traveled westward along the Silk Road, unlocking the age of exploration. The path of progress was never a straight line. It was a map drawn by rivers, shaped by mountains, and channeled by the relentless, unyielding logic of the land itself. A thriving civilization can vanish when the land that feeds it suddenly changes its rules. The great Maya cities, with their towering pyramids and bustling markets, did not fall to a foreign army in a single battle. They faced a far more insidious enemy, a slow, relentless shift in the very climate that had sustained them for centuries. The rains began to fail. What had been a predictable cycle of wet and dry seasons became a terrifying uncertainty, then a prolonged drought that stretched for decades. In a rainforest, this was a death sentence. Their intricate reservoirs, once a brilliant adaptation to seasonal dryness, slowly emptied. The crops withered in the fields, and the social contract that bound millions to their rulers, the promise of water and food in exchange for labor and loyalty, simply evaporated. The geography that had made them powerful, the very landscape they had mastered, turned against them. This story repeats itself across the archaeological record. The Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, one of the world's first great empires, collapsed around 4,200 years ago when a dramatic arid period struck the Fertile Crescent. The wheat fields that fed their armies turned to dust, and the dust storms that followed buried cities whole, leaving behind a layer of sediment that tells a story of sudden, catastrophic climate change. Why were some societies more fragile than others? The answer is written in their geographical foundations. A civilization built entirely on rain-fed agriculture like the Maya had no backup plan when the rain stopped. Their entire existence was a gamble on a stable climate, but a river-based society like ancient Egypt had a buffer. The Nile's annual flood was fed by rains far away in the Ethiopian highlands. A local drought in Egypt might cause hardship, but it would not necessarily break the entire system, as long as the distant headwaters continued to send their life-giving silt and water downstream. The landscape itself determined their breaking point. Coastal settlements faced a different kind of climate threat. As sea levels rose slowly over centuries, or sometimes rapidly from meltwater pulses, the very ground beneath their homes became unstable. Trading ports that had been centers of wealth found their harbors silting up or their freshwater springs contaminated by saltwater intrusion. Entire communities were forced to retreat inland, abandoning the maritime networks that were their lifeblood. In the same way, desertification could erase a civilization's agricultural heartland, pushing pastoralists and farmers into conflict over the shrinking patches of fertile ground. Yet the story is not simply one of collapse. The archaeological record also reveals remarkable stories of adaptation. In the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones responded to increasing aridity by moving from scattered villages to elaborate, defensible cliff dwellings that conserved resources and offered protection. They changed their entire way of life to suit the new reality of their landscape. Their success and the failure of others teaches us a powerful lesson about resilience. It was never about the size of an empire's army or the grandeur of its temples. True resilience was found in flexibility, in the ability to read the changing signals of the land and to innovate, to change farming techniques, to migrate, or to fundamentally restructure society. Our modern world, with its global supply chains and massive coastal cities, faces these same geographical vulnerabilities on a planetary scale. The climate is shifting once again, and the forgotten landscapes beneath our feet are beginning to reassert their ancient power. The skyline of London is a monument to a long-vanished river crossing. Its entire financial heart, the City of London, grew from a single point where the Thames was shallow and narrow enough to ford in prehistoric times. That simple geographical fact, a slight rise in the riverbed, created a natural meeting point for tracks coming from north and south. the Romans recognized its strategic value and built their city of Londinium there, and 2,000 years later, the world's most powerful banks cluster on that very spot, their glass towers standing where legionaries once patrolled a muddy wall. This is the hidden power of the palimpsest city, a place where ancient geography is written and rewritten but never fully erased. Paris tells a similar story. Its entire urban core developed from a small cluster of islands in the Seine. For early tribes, these islands were natural fortresses, easily defended and controlling river traffic. The settlement that would become Paris never left that nucleus. The grand boulevards and arrondissements of the modern city spiraled out from those original islands, their street patterns still radiating from a geographical logic that ceased to matter centuries ago. The original reason for a city's location is often a ghost, a memory that no longer serves a practical purpose but continues to shape everything. Mexico City is a breathtaking example. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was a marvel built on an island in Lake Texcoco, a location chosen for its defensive and resource advantages. The Spanish conquistadors drained the lake, but they built their colonial capital directly on top of the Aztec ruins. Today, Mexico City, one of the largest metropolises on Earth, sinks into the soft, waterlogged clay of that filled-in lakebed. The very ground beneath it is a constant, expensive reminder of the ancient landscape it replaced, a geographical choice from 500 years ago that dictates modern engineering challenges. Look at the roads you drive every day. That major highway twisting through a mountain pass likely follows the exact trail first blazed by migrating animals, then used by indigenous hunters, and later by pioneer wagons. The geographical logic was sound then, and it remains sound now. A river valley still offers the gentlest grade for a railway. A ridgeline still provides the most defensible and driest route for a road. Our modern transportation networks are often just paved over versions of these ancient paths, their routes predetermined by the immutable logic of the land itself. Even the social and economic divisions of a city can be traced back to its geographical birth. The most expensive neighborhoods in many older cities are often found on the high ground. This was not an accident of real estate. The high ground offered safety from floods, cleaner air, and better drainage, advantages that the wealthy secured for themselves centuries ago. Meanwhile, industrial areas were often relegated to low-lying floodplains or downwind locations, a pattern set when water and wind power were the primary engines of industry. These original geographical decisions hardened into social patterns that persist long after the initial reasons have faded. Why does one part of a city feel like its historic core, while another feels like a sprawling, modern addition? The answer is often written in the forgotten landscape beneath the pavement. Understanding these deep patterns is like gaining X-ray vision into urban life. It explains why a city grew lopsided, why certain districts feel perpetually congested, or why the most valuable land is where it is. The ancient river, the defensive hill, the safe harbor, they are all still there, silently guiding the flow of money, people, and power in the world we have built on top of them. Even our digital world, seemingly built of pure information, remains tethered to the ancient logic of the land. The internet feels like a placeless cloud, yet its physical heart beats in massive, windowless data centers that consume more power than a small city. These digital temples are not scattered randomly across the globe. They cluster where geography offers its modern blessings, near colossal dams for cheap hydropower, or in frigid northern climates where the cold air itself provides free cooling for their superheated servers. The fiber optic cables that carry our thoughts at the speed of light are not so different from Roman roads. They follow the paths of least resistance, often laid alongside railroad tracks and highways that themselves follow ancient river valleys and mountain passes. The newest trade routes for data still bow to the old topographical rules, and just as fertile plains once attracted farmers, regions with a high concentration of prestigious universities now attract tech giants, creating modern-day city-states of innovation whose wealth is built on a foundation of educated minds, another kind of rich soil. This creates a fascinating new layer on the old map. A remote mountain town might be revitalized because its scenic beauty and quality of life attract a community of digital content creators, a new form of pastoralism made possible by satellite internet. Yet, at the same time, the very same ancient geographical advantages that made London or Singapore global trading hubs for spices and silk now make them ideal nodes for the digital economy, reinforcing their importance with a new kind of flow. The internet did not erase the power of place. It simply gave the ancient landscape a new vocabulary with which to speak. The fundamental imperatives remain unchanged: access to resources, security, and efficient connection. We have simply swapped aquifers for electrical grids and caravan stops for server farms, proving that even in our most advanced age, we are still building our future on that same forgotten map. We can now raid the Earth's forgotten stories without lifting a shovel. Technologies like LIDAR peer through dense jungle canopies with laser precision, revealing the ghostly grid of ancient city streets and farmlands hidden for 1,000 years. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses deep into the soil, mapping the foundations of buried walls and the subtle depressions of long filled-in moats. From space, satellite imagery captures subtle differences in soil moisture and plant growth that betray the presence of buried river channels and the outlines of ancient harbors now miles from the sea. These tools are like X-ray vision for the planet, letting us see the invisible architecture of the past. The analysis goes even deeper into the dirt itself. By studying the chemistry of the soil, scientists can identify the unique nutrient signatures left by ancient human activity. A patch of ground rich in phosphorus might mark the site of a livestock enclosure, while certain nitrogen levels can pinpoint where crops were grown thousands of years ago. They can even extract ancient pollen grains preserved in lake beds and peat bogs, a microscopic time capsule that tells us precisely what trees, grasses, and cultivated plants covered the land in a specific era. This lets us reconstruct the vanished environment a civilization looked upon every day. This fusion of traditional archaeology and high-tech geographical analysis is rewriting our understanding of history. We are no longer just guessing why a city was built in a certain spot. We can see the entire system, the lost river that provided its water, the fertile plains that fed its people, and the network of trails that connected it to the world. These methods have revealed previously unknown geographical factors behind the rise and fall of civilizations, showing how a slow shift in a river's course could starve a mighty empire, or how a change in ancient rainfall patterns forced a mass migration. Each new technological refinement peels back another layer, illuminating the profound and unbreakable bond between the terrain and the human story written upon it. Our modern world is a living echo of these ancient landscapes. The deep, fertile soils of the Yellow River Basin still produce the wheat that feeds millions, just as they fed the earliest Chinese dynasties. The same mountain passes in the Hindu Kush that once funneled Silk Road caravans now guide the routes of pipelines and fiber optic cables. The deep water harbors of Singapore and Rotterdam, which made them maritime superpowers centuries ago, now make them the busiest ports for global container shipping. The underlying logic of the land has not changed, only the surface expression of our dependence on it. This is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a vital key to navigating our future as we face the immense challenges of climate change and rapid urbanization. Understanding these deep geographical roots becomes a matter of survival. Cities sinking into ancient lake beds like Mexico City teach us about the long-term consequences of ignoring the ground beneath our feet. The collapse of past civilizations due to shifting rainfall patterns, like the Maya, offers a stark warning about the fragility of our own systems, which are built upon the same geographical foundations. By remembering how ancient peoples adapted to their environments or failed to, we gain a powerful toolkit for building more resilient communities today. We can design cities that work with their watersheds instead of against them, protect agricultural lands that have been fertile for millennia, and anticipate how rising sea levels might reclaim those coastal plains we built upon when the oceans were lower. The next time you walk through your own city or town, pause for a moment, look beyond the pavement and the buildings, ask yourself why the main street curves in that particular way, or why the oldest part of town is built on that specific hill. You might be standing on the bank of a buried stream, the shore of a long-vanished lake, or a trail that has been in use for 10,000 years. The forgotten map is all around you, waiting.